face you are staring at, should you have the misfortune to meet in real life, would belong to somebody who would drag you into his car against your will, ensuring you couldn't say no verbally or physically, deceptively promising to pay for a service. He would repay you with only cruel actions. He might release you, but only after forcing you to participate in a sick, twisted game, not before gratifying himself through your severe and intense suffering. Even though there may be a glimmer of hope, a light at the end of the tunnel, it is precisely that hope he seeks to snuff out, maximizing his gratification from your overwhelming pain. You may ask, what is this twisted game? The rules are simple, yet horrifying. You're dragged into the middle of nowhere with nothing but the clothes on your back. Your goal? To escape as far as possible. And if you're lucky, make it back to civilization. The catch: Robert Hansen, also known as a butcher baker, will hunt you with a rifle, treating you like wild game. What are your odds of surviving this deadly game? To answer that, we'll take a deeper look into the psyche of this killer, his motives, his insecurities, and what shaped him into the person he became. By understanding his psychology, years of pain, bullying, harassment, or whatever events sowed the seeds of his actions, we can begin to explore the possibility of defeating this kind of evil. It was psychological forces that created him, and only through a psychological understanding can we hope to overcome him. I'd like to start by mentioning that Robert Hansen's father was in the military. As we know, many soldiers return from World War II with severe PTSD, which has been linked to what some call the baby boomer serial killer wave theory. This theory suggests the trauma experienced by these soldiers overseas is passed on to their children, often through strict or abusive parenting. Many of these fathers were domineering, over-disciplinarian, and degrading to their children, creating environments of immense pressure and resentment. I have personally seen how the mindset of, I must be strict and strong to raise my child well, can backfire. Parents may not realize that their overbearing methods can eventually lead to emotional breakage. Children raised under such conditions can grow into adults capable of a level of violence that shocks even their own families. Looking at previous generations, we can see how attitudes towards discipline have softened over time. Earlier generations often physically abused their spouses and children. Over time, society moved toward a verbal discipline, and now we focus on gentler parenting styles. However, during the aftermath of World War II, this evolution was just beginning, and unresolved trauma had significant consequences. Robert Hansen's upbringing illustrates the potential outcomes of such an environment. Hansen worked with his father in the family bakery, where stress and conflicts from work often spilled over into their family home. As the eldest of two siblings, Hansen bore the brunt of his father's strict and critical behavior. This dynamic created a toxic environment with no escape, especially since there were no child labor laws to protect him at the time. Explosive argument at work for him would bleed into home life, adding a seething reminder of how powerless he was. Hansen himself later recalled running away into the wilderness for days, consumed by anger and hate. Hansen's early years were marked by intense struggles. He stuttered and had severe acne, and was incredibly shy, all factors that made him an easy target for bullying. These experiences likely planted the seeds for his later resentment and antisocial behavior. He also worked grueling hours before and after school, which further isolated him from his peers. While he initially sought love and acceptance, repeated rejections in high school only deepened his sense of betrayal. His primary hobbies, hunting, fishing, and guns, became outlets for his growing frustrations. Over time, his hobby morphed into a disturbing obsession, where his mastery of hunting blended with his rage and twisted fantasies. Hansen's criminal escalation began with acts of arson. In 1960, at the age of 21, he burned down a school bus garage, resulting in his arrest and a 20-month jail sentence. During this time, his first wife divorced him. Hansen's behavior continued to deteriorate as he struggled with mental illness, including manic depression and schizophrenia. Although he was prescribed lithium, a medication that reduces intense mood swings and prevents self-harm, it's unclear if he consistently took it. By the 1970s, Hansen had escalated to violent attacks against women, targeting them through a horrifying routine. He would lure victims into his car, often promising to pay for services, assaulting them, and transporting them to the remote wilderness. There he would hunt them like animals, unaliving them in a twisted reflection of his hunting hobby. He is believed to have assaulted 30 women and unalived 17. Mostly street workers and other vulnerable individuals. One of his victims, 18-year-old Celia Benzentin, was discovered in a frozen field. Although evidence tied Hansen to the crime, it wasn't enough to prosecute him at the time. Later, he staged a robbery at his own house, using the insurance payout to purchase a small plane, which he used to transport victims deeper into isolated areas. Hansen's downfall began in 1982 when the body of Sherry Moreau was found with a spent .223 shell casing. Similar to a previous case, the discovery led investigators to reconsider him as a suspect. In June 1983, Cindy Paulson, one of Hansen's intended victims, escaped and contacted police. Her account exposed Hansen's pattern of luring women with money, then abducting them and torturing them. Despite initial attempts to cover his tracks with alibis, investigators uncovered more evidence, including a map marking the burial sites of his victims. On February 18, 1984, Hansen was convicted of multiple unalivings and sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He eventually confessed to 17 unalivings but expressed no remorse, instead trying to justify his actions with a twisted sense of morality. Hansen died in prison on August 21st, 2014, with a do not resuscitate order in place. Here's a paper with interesting findings by the Department of Psychology from the University of the Free State. During Hansen's time working in his father's bakery, he was subjected to extended hours and a strict regime, where his father maintained control over every aspect of his life, from the time he woke up to the time he went to bed. With school and work blending seamlessly into his daily life, Hansen lacked personal boundaries or a place to recede. Adding to this sense of helplessness, Hansen was naturally left-handed, but was forced to use his right hand. This only further reinforced feelings of worthlessness and a lack of autonomy. His mother was described as a yes woman and obeyed Hansen's father's every command, establishing an early belief in Hansen's mind that women were inherently submissive and easy to control. Hansen's manipulative tendencies began to manifest over his interactions with street workers, where he developed a hunger for power following his stint in jail. He returned to work for his father. During this period, he reportedly experienced a perverse sense of gratification through minor thefts, further fueling his compulsion for control. Research also notes that Hansen's treatment of women varied. He would assault and victimize those who defied him, but release those who complied, which reveals his complex psychological motivations. Alarmingly, it's recorded that he viewed even the simplest gestures, such as a smile from a passerby, as an invitation for violence. Hansen reportedly claimed he didn't initially harbor hatred towards women. For him, these thoughts initially started as a sick game. Over time, his mindset degraded further, and he categorized street workers into good and bad, depending on their availability or actions, rationalizing horrific crimes against them as justified by their societal status. The research also reveals that Hansen confessed to multiple crimes not yet discovered, reinforcing his need for validation even through violent behavior. By stripping his victims of agency, Hansen sought to make them feel as powerless as he did during his formative years. He seemingly dehumanized his victims by comparing them to animals, making it psychologically easier for him to commit acts of unthinkable brutality. Chillingly, Hansen would revisit his burial sites, often dropping to his knees and digging with his bare hands, overcome with excitement. This ritual suggests an attempt to relive or cement his sense of dominance. Experts conclude that Hansen likely never developed a full personality, which is supported by his infantile attitudes and skewed moral framework. Unlike some serial offenders, such as Jeffrey Dahmer, who sought a symbiotic merger by consuming his victims, Hansen achieved this through rendering his victims powerless, mirroring his internal struggles and unresolved trauma. I'd like to think that with enough pattern recognition, we could potentially mitigate, maybe prevent, even stop this sort of sickness from seeding. To me, what stands out is the many profiles out there with similar backgrounds. If you have a perspective or something you found perplexing, one thing that comes to mind: in the Alaskan wilderness, Hansen probably felt a sense of freedom unmatched by any state. I think that allowed him to act lawlessly, not to mention the little action from law enforcement in this case. Attempting to understand his thoughts might drive you insane, but what if that's the key to eliminating this problem altogether? Nothing could ever justify his actions. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you give feedback, and later, guys.